Germany. For months it has been talking tough on Greece, insisting on tougher measures to cut costs and arguing that bondholders should share the bailout pain with the European Union and the IMF. But suddenly, it appears Germany has shifted its position enough to allow at least one EU official to say a total debt restructuring is off the table. Terry Keeley knows many of the key players in these talks. Until last year, he was UBS's top banker to central banks and sovereign wealth funds. Terry now runs his own firm, Sovereign Trends, advising the same clients. He's also a Bloomberg contributing editor. Terry, Jean-Claude Juncker, finance minister for Luxembourg, says a total restructuring is off the table. What does that mean? You have to parse this language for us. When a finance official at that level says total restructuring, what does he mean? That a partial restructuring is still on the table?
He means two things. A total restructuring is off the table for now.
Okay.
And the second thing he means, Eric, is clearly that some form of voluntary restructuring, reprofiling is the new word, restructuring is on the table for sure.
Can any one man really speak for all of Europe at this point?
Of course not. And no one can really guess where a possible voluntary restructuring at this stage would go. There's many, many iterations of voluntary restructurings, Eric, as you know. We've had our own example recently in the United States with the General Motors restructuring. These are not exactly great kumbaya moments. People don't sit around and have feel-good,
right.
How do we help one another? They are intensely debated and always result in losers.
And voluntary is a matter of opinion in some cases, right?
Well, let's be clear. The most successful voluntary debt restructurings have occurred when the threat of a hard default lies right outside the door. If you want to get adequate terms, and many people, the cover article of Barron's this weekend, for example, saying the only solution for Greece is a hard default, a 50% immediate haircut. Are we just dragging this out with what will ultimately be a hard default or a much more dramatic restructuring? My position, like Stefan Deo earlier in the morning, would be yes.
That a hard default is the way to get out of this.
That a massive restructuring. Eric,
Okay, but hang on a second, because this brings Germany into the question here. Why would Germany back down? If Germany wanted to see some kind of a haircut, shared pain, restructuring, rescheduling, whatever you want to call it, why would they want to back down? Is it because somebody woke up to the magnitude of the potential losses, say, that the German banking system might suffer if there were to be a 50% haircut?
I believe you had Larry Fink on earlier in the morning, and he was talking about how unprepared, how ill-prepared the European financial system is for a massive default. Certainly that's the case. How bad it is in Germany, I've seen figures to suggest that the Deutsche Postbank will lose somewhere close to 30% of its equity capital in a full default. Many institutions in Europe are not prepared. And obviously the ECB, which owns 20% of Greek debt outstanding, also is not prepared to bail out an entire European banking system in such a case. The ECB continues to buy for time. Even Mr. Juncker is buying for time.
So buying for time until we have a series of steps towards a restructuring,
until the private financial system is able to accept these losses. The question then, Eric, is what will those losses be? Will they be then 60 cents on the dollar, 50 cents on the dollar, 50 cents on the euro, 30 cents? The longer we wait, if the suggestion that we can draw, and I believe the most important analogy is from Latin America and the Brady debt solution, the longer you wait...
From the 1980s.
From the 1980s. The longer you wait, the higher the haircut. And in many ways, the voluntary debt restructuring that took place in Latin America, it wasn't just Latin America, also Poland, Nigeria in the end. The Brady solution was an extremely successful solution, perhaps the only one we've had, of a massive sovereign debt restructuring that we can draw from. Voluntary, a number of choices, menu options that you could choose.
What about Argentina, though?
Well, that was more recent. Argentina,
right, but some could say that that was successful.
Yes, so far. You know, a lot of people talk about getting Greece back on its feet. The truth of the matter is, Eric, Greece has not been on its feet for several millennia. We don't really want to put Greece's economy back together the way it has been in the post-war period. 80% of Greece's economy is the service sector. Half of that is the government sector. 40% of Greek GDP is government workers. Until that problem is addressed, there is no solution for Greece's economy.
We're talking about the Greek sovereign debt situation and what it means for European banks, among others. Terry, just before the break, you raised the possibility of a Brady-like approach to Greece's debt problem. What exactly would that entail?
Well, clearly, the Brady plan was enacted after 10 years, a lost decade in Argentina. There was the Baker plan before there was the Brady plan, Erik. And what ultimately the Brady plan was a voluntary debt restructuring of huge magnitude. Started in Mexico, went to another 14 countries. And ultimately what it led to was a menu of choices. Either you could opt to have your bonds become par bonds, if you recall, they stapled a 30-year Treasury note to it, or you could have discounted bonds. This is a useful way of looking at potentially the resolution of a large-scale European debt crisis. Right now, ministers are trying to keep
beyond just Greece. We're talking
right
about
now, they want it to just
Ireland,
be Greece. They don't want to. They don't even want.
They don't even want to talk about it.
They don't even want to talk about it. But the reality is that Greece is a goner. Ireland is very, very tough. Portugal is the same, and we could have more. I think keeping a Brady plan in your pocket, ready to come out in an emergency case, would be a very good idea.
When you say Greece is a goner, what do you mean? I want to bring up actually a chart that may help to explain this, right? It is the performance of the 5-year Greek credit default swap, the cost of insuring Greek debt. Now, it's near, as you can see, its 1-year peak, about 1,400 basis points. It implies a 70% chance of default. So everybody's clapping his hands this morning saying, oh, Greece is going to be bailed out again by the EU and the IMF. The market still expects Greece to default at some point.
And the market's right. Clearly, we're going to have some form of restructuring. The only question is whether or not it's voluntary/soft or whether or not it's hard, or some combination of both, Erik.
Is it even in the EU's hands at all?
No.
What if Papandreou says
that
that Greece is going to pass a new budget, they're going to be tougher austerity measures, but the Greeks are rallying in the streets? What if they don't accede to these bailout demands? I mean, the demands that the EU and the IMF place on Greece? It doesn't really matter, does it? It's just throwing good money after bad.
Let this be a warning to the United States. The United States can still control its situation. Greece cannot. It is completely out of their control. The debt to GDP
you mean
ratio.
The EU cannot?
And the EU will ultimately have to forgive debts. The debt to GDP ratio is worsening in Erik. Greece is clearly in a recession. Austerity measures, such as they are, have not been working. How austere have they been? You still retire at the age of 63 in Greece versus 67 on average in Germany. People are arguing, but what is clear is what is working so far, what they've done so far, is not working. And some new approach will have to be taken. Without question, that will involve some rescheduling of their debts, beyond question.
Why isn't Germany taking a harder line right now? Germany had been taking the hardest line, it would appear, of the major nations, the major member states in the EU.
Yes. All
of a sudden, I wouldn't say the IMF is leaderless, but Dominique Strauss-Kahn is under house arrest here in New York City. And their man, Axel Weber, isn't going to run the ECB. So it would seem that there is some incentive for Germany to want to play hardball. Why isn't it happening?
Well, here's what's going to come, Erik. I think we don't know the final iterations. But what's clear is the next phase will involve some privatizations, raising new capital, and those privatizations will be very strictly monitored.
So maybe we're saying that's happening behind the scenes. We're not hearing as much of that.
That is going to clearly be a part of this short-term solution, the short-term extension of credit. They don't want the Greeks to even touch the proceeds from those privatizations. Those need to pass straight through to other, more reliable hands. The trust of the Greeks at this level is incredibly low. They lied to get into the Eurozone, they lied about their finances for a decade, and they are not on track. They have not met the targets for their austerity program. Their pledged targets, they have not met them. How much more rope can you give the Greeks?
That's a good question. Tough questions for all involved. Terry, as always, thank you. Our contributing editor here at Bloomberg, Terry Keeley, the senior managing principal at Sovereign Trends.